Psalm 83 is a prophecy. And we have the man who's written all about it, Bill Salus. Bill, welcome back to Prophecy Watch.
Gary, it's great to be back on the program.
Now, a lot of people may know about the work that you've done on Psalm 83, but probably there are a lot of people out there who don't know what is so prophetically significant about this psalm. And I want you to review what you've done and how your thinking has gone in the days since you first came up with this idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Psalm 83 is a prophecy, for one. Some people simply think it's an imprecatory prayer, but I think it's both. It is a prayer of lament, but it is also a prophecy written by Asaph about 3,000 years ago. He was King David's worship leader, but we find out in 2 Chronicles 29:30 that he was also a prophet. It says he was a seer. And we find out in 1 Chronicles 25:2 that David actually had Asaph prophesy. So we have a prophecy. Now, Asaph wrote 12 Psalms, Psalm 73 through Psalm 83, and Psalm 50. And by far the most prophetic of his Psalms would be Psalm 83, and I believe also Psalm 50. And he wrote this at a time when Israel had their anointed King David. They were winning wars, they were expanding territorially, they were talking about building their temple. And what he comes up with is a prophecy that I believe is for our time, that is nothing short of a genocidal attempt of the Jewish people. And we get into the first few verses of the Psalm. It tells us there's a confederacy coming against Israel.
Well, and you said it was sort of an imprecatory prayer, and it's keep not thou silence, O God, hold not thy peace, and be not still, O God. The prophet here is crying out for justice, and somebody has come after Israel, and the prophet is saying, God, please hear and answer our prayer.
Well, absolutely. And that first verse is very telling. Usually when I teach on this, I read through the whole prophecy, and then I come back to that first verse, because once you understand the details of the prophecy, you realize why Asaph has to say, you cannot keep silent about this matter. You cannot hold your peace any longer. You must be not still. In other words, you must have a victory in this matter, because what it turns out to be is an attempt to destroy the nation of Israel, that the name of Israel is remembered no more. And God cannot keep silent about that. God has big plans for Israel in the end times.
So that brings us up to the big question. What do we learn about conditions today and about Bible prophecy concerning today's world by reading Psalm 83?
Well, we see that it talks about a final Arab-Israeli conflict. You know, right now the international community wants to resolve that Arab-Israeli conflict, that Palestinian-Israeli conflict. They think that giving up land for peace is the option. But the Bible talks about a different recipe, a different understanding of what's going to happen. It predicted that diplomacy will fail and war will come, because there's an ancient hatred that exists around these Arab countries that goes back from time immemorial, that is now embraced in the religion of Islam, that just won't accept Israel in that Middle East anymore, back in their homeland. They voted against her being in Israel in 1947. They came to war against Israel in 1948 when it became a nation. And they still don't recognize Israel's right to exist. They've had wars after that in 67 and 1973, leading to a climactic concluding war, in my estimation. Psalm 83 is a process that has been ongoing, but it's going to find fulfillment, and the Arab-Israeli conflict will be resolved. And according to the prophecy, it looks like they will no longer oppress the Jews per se. Now, that's dealing with the inner circle of countries listed in Psalm 83. They share common borders with Israel, and we find out who they are in Psalm 83, verses 6 through 8.
Now, there's been a lot of discussion about this, and as happens in the world of Bible prophecy, when you defend a premise, somebody else comes along and says, no, I see it a little different way, Bill. And you've been through a lot of debates about this. Is Psalm 83 partially fulfilled now, or is it about to be fulfilled? How do you put it together?
Well, a couple answers on that, if you will. Initially, when I came out with Psalm 83, I came out with a book called Israelistine, the Ancient Blueprints of the Future Middle East. And I've got hit with a lot of objections. You know, how come no one caught this prophecy? Is it really a prophecy? Was it already fulfilled in 1948? Why can't it be part of Ezekiel 38? Is it part of the tribulation? So the book you're offering here, Psalm 83, I actually answered all of those questions. And of course, it came out after the Arab Spring too, because there were new developments in 2011 with what happened when the Middle East lit up like wildfires with the Arab Spring going on. So the Psalm 83 book came out and answered all those questions. But yeah, I get into why it was, partially perhaps fulfilled in 1948, but not completely fulfilled. A lot of people believe it was fulfilled in 1948. I get into reasons why it's independently different than Ezekiel 38. I'll just answer that question real quick, because Psalm 83 deals with an inner circle of countries that share common borders with Israel. You're dealing with Lebanon, where the Hezbollah are, Syria. You're dealing with parts of Iraq. You're dealing with Jordan, the Palestinians, the Hamas and the Philistia, probably parts of Saudi Arabia and Egypt. They've had an ancient hatred of Israel. They've been Israel's notorious enemies in the past. So you got those enemies, but Ezekiel 38, which lists an entirely different group, they're an outer ring of countries. None of them share common borders with Israel. You're dealing with Turkey, Russia, Iran, some of the northern African countries. You got Libya in there. You got maybe some of the breakaway republics of the Soviet Union. Never been Israel's enemies, but they're going to come against Israel in their own coalition. So you got different enemies, different defeats. I point out in the Psalm 83 book that the Israeli defense forces are the tool used by the Lord to defeat their Arab enemies around them. But in Ezekiel 38, you've got supernatural defeat by the Lord. You've got flooding rains, an earthquake, fire, hail, and brimstone. That's too formidable of an offense. The Lord has to intervene on that situation. You've got different motivations. You'll read in Psalm 83, verse 12, they want the promised land. They want the pastures of God. But Ezekiel 38 is coming for plunder and booty, and entirely different Israel's livelihood. So I get into, these are just a few of the things you'll get in this book, because I answer all these questions for people. And the other argument is, was it fulfilled in 1948, is a big argument, because those countries that are listed in Psalm 83 actually did come against Israel in 1948. But was that the final fulfillment? And time permitting, I'll explain why it wasn't.
Well, we have quite a bit of time right now. Psalm 83, and we'll be getting to this, and I'm not sure this is quite the time to do it, but you've already opened the topic of Psalm 83 versus Ezekiel 38 and pointed out that Psalm 83 is compact and Ezekiel 38 has very large perimeter of international powers. Mm-hmm. And some people have said, well, maybe they happen right at the very same time. Mm-hmm. Or does one lead to another? How do you put that all together?
Well, I do believe one leads to the other. I do believe they are separate events. I gave you a few of the differences among the two prophecies. Mm-hmm. What some people do is, it's interesting, because Ezekiel's very clear in his description. Matter of fact, Ezekiel 38 and 39 are 52 verses of some of the most understandable Bible prophecy. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to read those verses and come away with a pretty good understanding of what that Ezekiel 38 prophecy is about. Mm-hmm. And I think God intended it that way, because in Ezekiel 39:7, we're said God is actually going to use that prophecy to make his holy name known in the midst of his people Israel. They no longer will profane it. The Israelis will no longer profane God's name. And then the nations will know he's God, because it's such a sovereign event. Mm-hmm. So, but a lot of people come along and Ezekiel lists 9 populations, very specific: Gog, Magog, Rosh, by the names of their terms, vernacular of his time. But he omits all the other terms like the Edomites and the Ammonites and the Moabites, those countries that are in Psalm 83. I believe that's intentional, because they're not part of it. Now, some people will come along, it says in Ezekiel 38, verse 6, and says, yeah, but it says there's many peoples with thee. Okay? But I don't believe that there's many people with thee. There's the hordes of Gog. This is a massive army with the Turkey's army and Iranians, etc. Mm-hmm. Also, Saudi Arabia shows up in Ezekiel 38 as protesters, and I believe it's verse 13 as Dedan. So what are they doing if they're among the many peoples with thee? They're sitting on the sidelines, kind of protesting with Yemen and the merchants of Tarshish and their young lions, which I believe would probably very much be dealing with the UK and the young lions of colonies, maybe even America, this type of thing. So, but a lot of people are looking. The thing that's fascinating right now is people are looking at Ezekiel 38 as if it's a now prophecy. It could happen at the present mm-hmm. time, as if there's no more conditions or preconditions. They see Russia's alliance with Iran, especially in that Syrian revolution, which is winding down now. Because of Hezbollah, Iran, and Russia's help, they've been able to keep Bashar Assad in power in Syria. They've dealt with the ISIS issue. But I tell people, look, let's close the newspaper. Let's turn off the internet for a minute and let's read Ezekiel 38, verses 8 through 13, and see what he says about Israel in Ezekiel 38. He says they will be dwelling in the midst of the land. They will be dwelling securely. They will be dwelling without walls, bars, nor gates. They will be very prosperous because Russia's coming after their livelihood. Now,
I'm sure you've given some thought to this, but the word wall kind of rang a bell because Israel does have a wall along Gaza to keep out the Gazans. And would we put that up as maybe a defense against the nearness of this thing? In other words, Israel does have a wall. And Ezekiel 38 says it doesn't have walls or gates.
well, the prophecy, for the most part, reads quite literally. So I don't know why we would allegorize a wall. I mean, I look at a wall and security checkpoints as bars and gates. These things are in Israel. That wall, they have a partition wall that takes Palestinian terror and separates it out from Israel proper. Mm-hmm. That's about 403-mile wall. At some point, it's 20 feet high and it's filled with concrete. You know, that wall exists right now because Israel is not dwelling securely in the midst of the land. The Hebrew words Ezekiel uses for dwelling securely, he uses them a couple times in Ezekiel 38, or yeshav batak. And what that means is, in Ezekiel's usages, it's dwelling securely because, not because of land for peace diplomacies, but because they've conquered their enemy and they don't have the fear of that enemy anymore. They can dwell securely. Matter of fact, people will ask me, well, when will Israel dwell securely? And if you turn to Ezekiel 28, verses 26 through 28, Gary, if you want to read it to your audience, Ezekiel already tells us in advance when Israel will dwell securely.
We'll do that in just a moment. But first, I have to ask you a question. Are you going to be at our fall prophecy conference?
What a segue. I am, and I'm excited about that.
I would imagine you're going to be talking about some of the things we're talking about today. Maybe you'll have had time by that time to perfect them just a little bit.
Well, I'm thinking so too, Gary. I'm putting my thoughts together for this wonderful conference with all these speakers that are going to be there. I always enjoy coming to your conferences, but things are so active in the Middle East right now, I think it's going to be difficult for me not to be talking about important things going on in the Middle East with Iran and the Psalm 83 and this type of thing.
It's the Blessed Hope Prophecy Forum, October 12th through 14th, 2018. A big year, prophetically speaking, and we hope we'll see you there. Our second annual Blessed Hope Prophecy Forum is not far away, and here to talk about it, Bob Ulrich.
The Prophecy Watchers are coming back to Norman, Oklahoma. October 12th through 14th, 2018, we're going to be back with 30 of the leading names in Bible prophecy. I'm sure you recognize many of the names: Gary Stearman, Tommy Ice, L.A. Marzulli, David Reagan, Jan Markell, Bill Koenig, Don Perkins, Andy Woods, Gary Frazier, Bill Salus. It's literally one of the biggest one-of-a-kind prophecy conferences in the world today.
It is, Bob, in a year. The year 2018, which just happens to be prophetically important.
30 speakers delivering over 60 messages. You can register for this great event at prophecywatchers.com, or you can call our ministry toll-free at 888-722-0008. Now,
Back to where we were. This is getting interesting, and the reason it's getting interesting to me is all we've heard now for over a year is Russia, 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 Russia. I don't know whether you've noticed this. Mm-hmm. Our new president and the word Russia seem inextricably intertwined right now. Russia is in the news like I've never seen in my lifetime, I think. Does that mean anything, prophetically speaking?
Well, they're in Bible prophecy. Most of us, yourself included, would say Russia shows up in Ezekiel 38, sort of as the leader of that Gog and Magog coalition with those invaders that come against Israel. Clearly in the latter days, it says, okay? And we talked about the conditions Israel will be in at that time, which I don't believe is yet. We'll look at Ezekiel 28 in a moment when Israel will dwell securely. But yeah, they're in the news. As a matter of fact, because they're in a relationship with Iran, Iran is also listed in Ezekiel 38 as Persia, in Ezekiel 38 verse 5. I, like many of our colleagues that are interested in Bible prophecy, are excited that Ezekiel 38 could be coming very soon, but I don't think it's a now prophecy. A now prophecy is a prophecy that lacks any preconditions. We could wake up one morning, it could happen at the present time. There's next prophecies that have some preconditions, and like we said, Ezekiel 38, Israel is not dwelling securely yet without walls, bars, nor gates. But I think I kind of use the example like Chuck Missler uses, like, yeah, Ezekiel 38 has got to be coming really soon. It's like when you go into a mall and you see the Christmas decorations out, you realize Thanksgiving must be right around the corner, right? You know, a lot of your viewers have heard that scenario. Well, yeah, in other words, certain things have to happen in advance for Ezekiel 38 for Israel to dwell securely. And you're going to see in Ezekiel 28 verses 24 through 26, Ezekiel tells us how Israel and when Israel will dwell securely.
It says here in verse 24, there shall be no more a pricking briar unto the house of Israel, nor any grieving thorn of all them that are round about them, and that despise them. And they shall know that I am the Lord God. Thus saith the Lord God, when I shall have gathered the house of Israel from the people among whom they are scattered, and shall be sanctified in them in the sight of the heathen, then shall they dwell in their land that I have given to my servant Jacob. And, this is verse 26 now, they shall dwell safely therein, and that's the term you talked about.
Yeshav, absolutely.
They shall dwell safely therein, and shall build houses and plant vineyards. Yea, they shall dwell with confidence when I have executed judgments upon all those that despise them round about, and they shall know that I am the Lord their God. What do you take from that now?
Well, I ask the question when I teach on this, are there people round about Israel that despise them? And they happen to be those that voted against their being in Israel in 1947 at the United Nations, that came at war against them in 1948.
Sure.
Those inner circle of Arab countries that happen to be listed in Psalm 83. Israel cannot dwell securely, Yeshav Batak, as long as they're their nemesis. And when judgments are executed upon them, which is what Ezekiel's saying, Israel can then dwell securely. They can tear down that wall. They won't be worried about Palestinian terrorism, etc. Now, these participants, these belligerents, are listed in Psalm 83, verses 6 through 8. The tents of Edom are listed there, in a habitation condition. And you get into the Ishmaelites and Hagarenes and Moab and Ammon. This is Jordan. The tents of Edom, I would say, have a reference to the Palestinian refugees. Tents of would be refugee conditions, biblically speaking. So you get a list of these people by the names of Asaph's vocabulary of his time, and they're in that roundabout, those countries roundabout that despise Israel.
And all that is in its initial form today. And now, meaning that things are set, but you're saying this Ezekiel 38, it may not be a now prophecy as you interpret it.
Right, I believe it's coming really soon, but I believe it's a next prophecy. I classify prophecies in my Now Prophecy book as now. These are the ones that could happen at the present time. There's about 9 or 10 on my list. The next prophecies are the ones that have minor preconditions, but they do have a few conditions that have to be in place before the prophecy can find fulfillment. And then I've got the last prophecies, which have some fairly significant prophecies. And I believe all these things are converging. I believe all the prophecies are going to happen soon and sequentially, but they're not all going to happen at the same time. They're going to stage themselves. What could happen now? What would then happen next? And what would happen last, like the Antichrist and the tribulation period and the judgments of the book of Revelation? Those would be the last prophecies. I don't believe the church will be here for some of those last prophecies. I don't believe we'll be here for the tribulation and that sort of thing. I'm a pre-trib rapture believer.
We started out in Psalm 83, and Bill talked a lot about his thoughts about it. I want to go back to Psalm 83 because we missed something we were talking about a minute ago. There is almost like a harbinger that popped up recently having to do with Psalm 83. And it was a long-buried archaeological artifact that came out at a particular time. It had everything to do with Psalm 83. Tell that story.
Yeah, this is the question. Was that a coincidental discovery or was that a providential discovery?
Right.
And what that discovery was very timely. You had back in 2006 in the summer, around July, middle of July, going on until the middle of August, a 34-day conflict going on in the Middle East between Hezbollah and Israel. And Hezbollah lobbed about 4,000 missiles into northern Israel. Many Israelis were in the bomb shelters throughout that whole period of time. In the middle of that event, in Ireland, a construction worker was doing a project. He was excavating for a project, and it wasn't an archaeological dig or anything like that, and his bulldozers came to a sudden halt because they found these antiquities, these ancient parchments that had been buried for, they say, maybe up to 1,200 years in this Irish bog soil. And what it was, Gary, that was about 22 different manuscripts of the Psalms. Now, unfortunately, having been buried for 1,200 years in mud, a lot of them were pretty much dilapidated, and they're in the Ireland Museum right now. They're trying to restore what they can, except coincidentally, one of them was opened in place and fairly unblemished. And guess what psalm that was? Psalm 83. Now, what's interesting about that is when you look at the over 31,000 verses in the Bible, the 1,189 chapters in the Bible, the 150 psalms in the Bible, there's only one place you will find any resemblance of a Hezbollah in a conflict with Israel, and that's in Psalm 83, verses 6 through 8, as a member of that Confederacy. And so I found that quite interesting. Now, at the same time, I was writing about Psalm 83. It was a vastly overlooked prophecy. Came out with my book, Israelistine, in 2008. The Psalm 83 book is now the updated version of that you're offering here. But these three things were all interacting. Was that coincidental or was that providential? Was God trying to let people know that prepare yourself for a prophecy to find fulfillment? And there are peripheral prophecies that surround Psalm 83 because you have Ammon and Moab and other groups in there. Now, why don't you just read, do you have Psalm 83 available? We should read the first 5 verses. So
Actually, I can go back to Psalm 83.
You read verse 1, do not keep silent, do not be still. Not
Yes,
keep silent. But we should read verses 2 through 5, and then we'll take a spin off on that for a minute.
Yeah, it starts out appealing to God, saying, God, hold not your peace. Verse 2 says, for lo, thine enemies make a tumult. They that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, come, let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance, for they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. And then you have a list of people who are confederate.
Of who they are. So who are they that's consulting together against Israel? Who are they that want to destroy the nation of Israel and banish the name of Israel that may be remembered no more? It's a confederacy. It's a contemporary alliance, a coalition, not a chronological ordering of Israel's enemies. Some people try to say that's what it is. It's just a prayer of lament. But when you look at the specific list in verses 6 through 8 on that inner circle of countries that share common borders with Israel, they don't represent all of Israel's historical enemies. They would just be a sampling of them. No, it's a confederacy. It says they are confederate against thee. And it says in verses 12 of Psalm 83, verse 12, they wanted to take the pastures of God for possession. So the reason they want to wipe Israel off the map is because they want to possess the promised land of Israel. They're not interested, if it's a prophecy for our time, which I believe it is, in a two-state solution. They're not interested in the land for peace deal. They want one state, another Arab state, probably so they can fly the flag of Palestine over it. That's why I think it's a very important prophecy to be watching at this point in time. Now, also they say in 1948 it was fulfilled, but it wasn't really, because if you read the full psalm, Asaph is petitioning the Lord to deal with this confederacy, to not be still, and he goes back and draws our attention to the book of Judges, chapters 4 through 8, and he starts talking about deal with them like Deborah dealt with the Canaanites, the prophetess Deborah, her general Barak. The Canaanites had oppressed them for 20 years, and the time came where they were no longer to oppress the Israelites, and so Barak defeated the Canaanite armies. And he talks about Gideon's little 300-man army, deal with them like you did with Gideon. And at that time, Gideon dealt with the Midianites who had oppressed the Jews for 7 years. And he goes on and says, deal with them, take out their princes, their nobles, Oreb and Zeb, Zalmunna, take out their infantry. And we know that with 300 men, he took out 120,000 Midianites. And the point being, from top to bottom, these armies were destroyed, their leaders were destroyed, and they never oppressed, you look throughout history, the Canaanites or the Midianites oppressed the Israelis again. I ask the question, are that inner circle of nations that came to war in 1948 still oppressing Israel? Are they still keeping Israel from not dwelling securely? And the answer is adamantly yes.
If you haven't availed yourself of Psalm 83, both the DVD set and the book, we still have them available in our Prophecy Watchers bookstore. By the way, We have Bill Salus's complete works in our online bookstore. All you do is go to the online bookstore, click, and scroll right down to Bill Salus's name, and you're going to find Psalm 83, the missing prophecy revealed. He's put a whole lot of thought into this, as you can tell. And to digest it fully, you really need to take time and look at it, maybe 2 or 3 times. But I think he's got some great ideas. We're going to put together a package, as we always do here at Prophecy Watchers. In addition to the Psalm 83 book and DVD, we have America, the Coming Mideast Wars. Topical, I must say. And if you look at what's going on in the world today, wow. The things are rumbling, and there are people trying to figure out exactly what in the world is happening. The now prophecies, you heard Bill talk about what he calls the now prophecies versus the next prophecies. Well, here we have the book and DVD of the now prophecies. All of these together. Look for the Bill Salus End Time Collection right on the Prophecy Watchers online bookstore. Just dial down to Bill Salus's name, and you'll see the Bill Salus End Time Collection. And believe me, you need to avail yourself of some of the knowledge that he's worked on for quite a while now, and it just keeps getting richer as we're getting closer to the prophesied events. Okay, Bill, we have just a couple of minutes left. How would you like to round up today?
Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the peripheral prophecies with Psalm 83. There's an abundance of other prophecies that connect with Psalm 83, and some people have sort of dismissed Psalm 83 lately because they think, well, look, Jordan's got a peace treaty with Israel, and Egypt's got a peace treaty with Israel. How could those be members of Psalm 83 that must have found fulfillment in 1948? And every time Israel starts talking about taking back control of the Temple Mount, which they relinquished to Jordan in 1967, Jordan starts talking about ripping up that peace treaty they got with Israel. It's paper thin. In Jeremiah 49:2, it tells us that there's a prophecy dealing with Jordan. It says there's going to be an alarm of war in Rabbah of the Ammonites, which is Ammon, Jordan.
Yeah.
It says it'll be a desolate mound. It'll be destruction. It says Israel will take possession of its inheritance, which that's part of the promised land of Israel. It also says regarding Jordan in Zephaniah 2, verses 8 and 9, that the Lord has heard the arrogant threats of Ammon and Moab, that's northern and central Jordan, approaching the borders of Israel. It says that there'll be a war, and the residue of Israel will plunder them, and his people will take their inheritance, if they read Zephaniah 2, verses 8 through 9. So I ask those people who say that this has already found fulfillment and the peace treaty with Jordan is solid, rock solid, when were those prophecies fulfilled? We need to look carefully at these prophecies. Sometimes maybe just shut our newspapers, turn off our internet, and read the Bible clearly and see what it's really saying there.
And that's what Bill does. He does read the Bible very deeply and clearly, and we appreciate your sharing with us today. And we're talking, of course, to Bill Salus, author of many books and DVDs, and you can come and hear him at the Blessed Hope Prophecy Forum this fall. I'm Gary Stearman. Hey, you keep watching. We are. Thanks for joining us on Prophecy Watchers. You can find us on the web at prophecywatchers.com. In the meantime, keep watching, everybody, and we'll see you soon.